Hello, good evening, and welcome to Scotland at 7 here at Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart, and I'm delighted tonight to be joined by Greg McCarra, who will be going through tonight's various bulletins with me. Greg, good to see you, and welcome to the programme.
Thank you, Donald. Nice to be here.
So, as always, we begin with the Ukrainian update, and it is now day 286. And the news from today is that a drone attack has set an oil storage tank on fire at an airfield in Kursk, the Russian region's governor Roman Starovoyt has said. Video footage posted on social media showed a large explosion lighting up the night sky, followed by a substantial fire at the airfield, which is 280 kilometres from the Ukrainian border. Russia has launched strikes overnight on the Zaporizhzhia region, according to Alexander Stewart, the head of Zaporizhzhia's regional military administration. At least 4 people were killed on Monday, Volodymyr Zelensky has said, amid Russian strikes during which 60 of 70 missiles were shot down. Russia's defence ministry said Ukrainian drones attacked 2 air bases at Ryazan and Saratov, killing 3 servicemen and wounding 4, with 2 aircraft damaged. Russian and Ukrainian authorities confirmed the exchange of 120 people in a prisoner swap today. Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak has said that Iran has not so far delivered ballistic missiles to Russia and may not do so as a result of diplomatic pressure and Iran's own internal political turmoil. Senior European Union officials have vowed to ensure Ukraine gets €18 billion in financial aid after Hungary's Viktor Orban vetoed the release of the funds. Ukrainian embassies have received more bloody packages, according to its foreign minister, in what Kyiv has described as a campaign of terror and intimidation. The Russian state-owned bank VTB said it was hit by an unprecedented cyber attack from abroad, which it said was the largest distributed denial of service cyber attack. We're suffering at the moment a little bit of a disruption in our streaming, so if you can just bear with us whilst we resolve this and sort this out. So
I'm hearing it fine.
If you have lost us for a short time, apologies. Glad to have you back, and you're with us, then you will have heard my bumbling attempts to cover over the top of it, but we still continue with our Ukrainian update from today, which is day 286, with Canadian-made parts found in kamikaze Iranian drones used by Russia to attack Ukraine, according to an investigative project from the non-governmental organisation Statewatch. The White House has said the latest Russian strikes against Ukraine are a reminder of Vladimir Putin's brutality. Putin himself has driven across the Kerch Bridge linking Russia and the Crimean Peninsula that was damaged by a truck bomb in October. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has said it will continue energy cooperation with Russia after the G7, the European Union, and Australia imposed the agreed price cap. Greg, Ukraine and the way in which we have united together in the West and the former East, as it were, in Central Europe, to try and support Ukraine in this battering that they have had from Russia doesn't seem to be waning, but it's a difficult time ahead, and we have to maintain that type of pressure and support.
I agree entirely. I suppose the difficult time ahead just might slightly wane for a few months. Mother Winter, as Russia always referred to it, will be taking a big part in what happens over the next 3 months or so. So maybe things will calm down a bit. It would be good to think that that would be an opportunity for rational thinking to take place from Russia and to find an opportunity to change their direction. But I have my doubts in that. One issue that I've noticed recently, and it has its good and its bad sides. Previously, Ukraine was fighting a defensive war where it was trying to fend off the attacks and protect the integrity of Ukraine, but not step over the border. But I did see yesterday some comments about missile strikes from Ukraine on. Now, I suspect it was offensive material within Russia. But that changes the dynamics of it if that is the case. The negative side is that some people might see that as not a defensive action by Ukraine, but an actual war with two participants. That's rather different. But on the positive side, it means that Ukraine doesn't have to stand there and take the punches. They can stop the punches happening. So it's changed dynamics, but Ukraine is still standing, and very good luck to them.
And we go from rolling with the punches internationally to domestic news that is literally hot off the press, and who will be delivering the punches down in Westminster as the Scottish National Party have elected Stephen Flynn as their new SNP Westminster leader. Stephen Flynn, who is the Member of Parliament for Aberdeen South, was elected today by 26 votes to 17, supported by Mary Black MP, who is the new deputy leader. Following their election at a meeting of the SNP Westminster Parliamentary Group this evening, Stephen Flynn and Mary Black will lead the SNP's team of MPs as they stand up for Scotland's interests and democratic right to hold an independence referendum. The Scottish National Party, of course, is the third party in the United Kingdom Parliament and the largest party in Scotland, representing 44 of the 59 Scottish constituencies at Westminster. This evening, Stephen Flynn said it is an honour to be elected to lead the SNP's strong and talented team of MPs during such a crucial period for Scotland. Under my leadership, SNP MPs will be relentlessly focused on standing up for Scotland's interests and our democratic right to decide our future in an independence referendum. Families across Scotland are paying a devastating price under Westminster control, with Brexit, austerity cuts and the Tory cost of living crisis hammering household budgets. SNP MPs will work harder than ever to hold the Tory government to account and make the case that independence is the essential route to safety, fairness and prosperity for Scotland. He commented further that he would like to thank Alison Thewlis and Stewart MacDonald, who are both hugely talented MPs and will continue to play a key role in our movement. Of course, they were the other candidates in the race. He further commented, I would also like to pay tribute to Ian Blackford MP and Kirsten Oswald MP, who have been a fantastic leadership team and will be welcome sources of advice as we move forward together. His new deputy, Mary Black, said, I'm delighted to have been elected as SNP Westminster Deputy Leader and look forward to working closely with Stephen Flynn and MPs across the Parliamentary Party as we stand up for Scotland and make the case for independence. Westminster is failing Scotland, with the Tories and Labour Party both wedded to Brexit, austerity cuts and democracy denial. It's clearer than ever that independence is the only way to escape the damage of Westminster control and get Scotland back on the path to prosperity. Well, Greg, a very swift election, one considering the number of elections that one political party down in Westminster had to get through until they came to a conclusion. This seems efficient by comparison, but certainly a new dawn, a new future.
Absolutely. You wonder if the Tories like to have regular party leader elections or group leader elections just so that they get the airtime, because it guarantees them coverage from an uncritical broadcaster. Or most of the broadcasters been that way, not yourselves. But in this case, just got it done. Ian had done a stint, he stood down, and that's fine. And Kirsten, similar, has got plenty of other things to go on with. I didn't know which way it was going to go. I know Stephen very slightly from back from his councillor days. I know Alison much better. I've known her for probably about 15 years before she, 10 anyway, before she became an MP. Both very capable people. It's nice if you compare the SNP with, say, the Scottish Conservatives, or, hey, better still, the Lib Dems, who will be the next leader of the Lib Dems in Scotland? Well, they've pretty well all had a go, and there's not much choice left, whereas in Westminster, still plenty of talent in there. So that's two fresh faces, two fresh voices. And I think that's a good idea, actually, to have change at this stage. That's not a comment on the outgoing, far from it, but we have a possible plebiscite election, which may be based on the next Westminster election coming up. And we need to just change the mindset for that, because we're looking at something completely different from any election that we've ever seen in Scotland. And fresh thinking, fresh people that go with that, probably a good thing.
I think that probably is the most positive part of that. You mentioned the Liberal Democrats. You could also mention the Scottish Labour Party in terms of the difficulty they've always had as when the music stopped, who was left standing and likely to be the one that would try and do the job that nobody really wanted. So I suppose in a sense, in terms of the independence movement, the positive here is that there is that depth on the substitutes bench and are likely to take things forward. And I think Mary Black as well has certainly got traction with the younger voting.
Absolutely. I first met Mary just a couple of weeks before the 2014 referendum. She was, as you'll probably know, a young student at the time, just about to graduate. And she was out touring with Jim Sellers, as it was, in his battle bus, the Margomobile, as he called it, after Margaret MacDonald. And she was fiery then, and she's fiery now. And we need fiery voices in Scotland. This is not a twee little debating society that we're in. This isn't a kind of a gentle discussion about what we're going to have for tea tomorrow. We've got to stir the blood. We've got to get people roused for the upcoming second referendum or plebiscite election, or let's just say decision by the Scottish people. I think there'll be two good people for leading that, because, as I say, they put fire in the blood.
And from it not being a twee little debating society to a twee little debating chamber, and the Labour Party thought that they were going to put out their plans for the new constitution and gain some traction. They certainly had an issue today as academics have criticised Labour's constitutional plans. And within 24 hours of its publication, their latest paper outlining their plans to reform the UK constitution has been criticised by leading academics. Kirsty Hughes, director of the Scottish Centre on European Relations, has branded Labour's plans hypocritical, saying Scotland has only been offered cursory crumbs to provide sound bites for an election. Andrew Tickle of Glasgow Caledonian University said there is almost nothing in the new prospectus from the Labour Party for Scotland. Commenting, Gillian Martin, MSP, said this damning verdict from academics in Scotland must be a wake-up call to Labour that their plan isn't worth the paper it's written on. Labour's attempt at tinkering at the edges of devolution has ended up with a policy paper that effectively undermines it. This was Labour's latest chance to bring something meaningful to the debate. It seems like tinker, cheerio time. The Labour Party had an opportunity to do something radical here, and I was listening to a number of the sound bites yesterday, and it was all about, let's take it away from the focus of what for 13 years the Scottish people have been asking for, into something which we think we can deliver and vow you away from separation.
Yeah, let's talk mainly about the Scottish bit, but let's just start off with remember that this wasn't all about Scotland. It never is. In fact, it was hardly about Scotland at all. The big thing was the reform of the House of Lords. I remember some time ago when Jack Straw was the leader of the House of Commons, and they were trying to reform the House of Lords, and they couldn't even figure out how to make a decision. They had 22 different motions put up. Every single one of the motions was defeated, and there was no last man standing. That was it. There was nothing that was going to be supported, and therefore the whole thing died. Labour have been proudly the last man standing for Labour in Scotland for Westminster, the wonderful MP for Edinburgh South. boasted earlier on today that, Labour's committed to abolition of the House of Lords. We have been for the last 100 years. Yes, well, okay, that's not a good sales pitch for your commitment to radical change. In Scotland, the vow was characterised by Gordon Brown himself as being the closest thing you could get to a federal system in a state like the UK. When challenged on that and said, well, you've done nothing about it and this doesn't make it federal, what he just said was, well, in the last statement, you should read the small print. That's also not a very good sales pitch when trying to persuade people of your openness, your integrity, and your commitment. No, just read the small print. We conned you. You should have realised we conned you. This is actually an interesting step backwards for the Labour Party in Scotland because several of the commitments that they were lining up for a manifesto just a couple of years ago, they've now backtracked on. It's maybe here's the best measure of it. Scour social media, and other than Keir Starmer, Gordon Brown, and Anna Sarwar, have a look for the vast number of people within the Labour Party who are saying this is fantastic, this is the breakthrough, this is what's going to bring Labour back to power in Scotland. Have a scour, look for it, you'll not find it. It's not there. The party itself realises that this isn't so much a damp squib, it's just it's not even a squib at all. There's nothing there. So it's I think it will now get more people who are Labour supporters. And by the way, I do never criticise Labour supporters. They're voters who have a right to choose how they're going to vote. They have a right to also choose their own future constitutionally. And the figures of those who support an independent Scotland vary around about the 40%, a wee bit below, a wee bit above. At the moment, it's just a wee bitty below. A very large proportion, and they have a right to decide what they want. But those who want independence in the Labour Party are going to look at this and say, we can't even get quasi-federalism, we can't get hemi-demi semi-quasi-federalism, we can't get anything like it, and yet that's what was promised. Let's give up. Let's just say that's it, and go for the right to choose and vote for independence instead.
Of course, the mention of the word quasi might get a few people running for the hedges in case there was a return, and certainly somebody who is not returning at any point soon is Michelle Mone, who is taking a leave of absence from the House of Lords. The Guardian is reporting that she is taking leave of absence with immediate effect. Her spokesperson has announced that she was taking this in order to clear her name of the allegations that have been unjustly levelled against her. The Guardian had previously revealed that Mone appeared to have received millions originating from the profits of a PPE company. The government is not expected to oppose a motion in the House of Commons to force the release of documents relating to a £200 million contract with PPE MedPro. Mone has previously denied having any relationship to that company. The vote is being held today about whether to publish the papers and give them to the Public Accounts Committee. Tory whips have instructed their MPs not to oppose it. Mone's leave of absence means she will not attend sittings or debates, voting proceedings, or be able to claim any allowance. She will also no longer be bound by parliamentary rules to declare her interests, including any directorships, shareholdings and non-financial interests. A leave of absence request could be blocked by the Lords Standards Commissioners, who are already investigating Mone over multiple potential breaches of the Lords Code of Conduct. The code states that if a peer takes a formal break in order to avoid an impending investigation, or whilst an investigation is underway, if a peer is already on leave of absence been placed under investigation, then that can also be ended immediately. Greg, I attend football matches where if you are winning by a significant number and the opposing fans are leaving, you sing, "I can see you sneaking out." Is this exactly what this Tory lady is doing, in that she's attempting to avoid facing the music?
Well, I saw the suggestion earlier on in social media that rather than taking a leave of absence, by the way, that's as if it's a polite request that's been granted. She's doing it. She's not asking for leave to do it. And I saw the suggestion that actually what she was doing was just cashing in her assets and jumping a plane to get out. I'm sure that's not true, and I have no evidence to support that whatsoever. But I just saw it elsewhere, and it was interesting. What is interesting is that when there was a perfectly fair attempt made by John Nicholson a week or two ago to press this issue and to try and get some discussion on the whole issue in the House of Commons. The Speaker rounded on him, said it had broken some archaic rule that pretty well nobody had ever heard of, and decided that the enemy in here was John Nicholson, the SNP MP. And I think I know fine well the person in here that really should be rounded on and investigated. But Westminster's rules are archaic in so many ways. I don't know if they're capable of bringing to task and bringing to court, if necessary, people who have fallen foul of the law. We saw all the way through Brexit, and we saw through Partygate and all the rest of it. It's a case of not should we do right or wrong. It's more a case of how much wrong can we get away with without being pulled down. And well, maybe she's gone too far. I don't know. I would just like to see it out in the open and people getting to the truth of it rather than the spin that we get so much to protect their own that you get from Westminster.
And moving from archaic laws and archaic rules within the context of Westminster, a relatively recent development down there was the Office of Budget Responsibility, much maligned though it was. And today the chair has said that UK government decisions will add over £40 billion of borrowing to the United Kingdom economy. Holyrood's Finance Committee were told today that the United Kingdom government management of the economy has cost taxpayers more than £40 billion in extra debt in just 6 months. That equates to £600 for every man, woman and child in the United Kingdom. The Office for Budget Responsibility Chair Richard Hughes commented that the past 6 months have witnessed a series of dramatic swings in policy, with 5 major fiscal statements delivered by 3 consecutive governments, adding that taken together and including their indirect effects via the economy, the net impact of the announcements and reversals has been to add over £40 billion of borrowing by 2027-28. Finance convener Kenneth Gibson, MSP, commented, "These eye-watering figures are a damning indictment of the chronic mismanagement of the last 3 consecutive Tory governments, and the OBR says worse is to come, predicting a 7% fall in living standards over the next 2 years. Brexit is crippling our economy, while Ireland's economy is expected to grow by 5.4% next year. The United Kingdom's will shrink by 0.8%. Labour is now a pro-Brexit party with a pro-Brexit leader completely at one with the Tories when it comes to ignoring Scotland's vote to remain in the European Union." It's fiscal this, fiscal that. We know that it was a fiscal event so that they didn't have to allow the Office of Budget Responsibility to announce what was in the effect of what they were announcing. Then there was the change, then there was the flip, the flop, the change, the mismanagement and so on. But the disaster is left on people's doorsteps because of the way in which the cost of living has rocketed.
Indeed. Actually, it was even worse than you're saying there, Donald. When it came to the budget, the catastrophic budget on the 23rd, 4th of September, from Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, up to that point, the Office of Business Responsibility had been set up so that it could run the ruler over any budget proposals. It could see, scrutinise it to see if there were any problems, flaws, misunderstandings, unforeseen consequences. Let me say that again, to see if there were unforeseen consequences that could come out of a budget, and then to forewarn the government before they made their final budget statement. In this case, the 2 that I mentioned, now out of power, but by God, their effects live on, they decided to not pass it to the OBR, not allow them to scrutinise it. So what we have is a scrutiny body which can be bypassed at the whim of a Prime Minister. Just like the Constitution of Scotland, well, in as far as there is one that's recognised by Westminster, it can and will be overlooked by them, just as any promise can be written on a piece of scrap paper and then chucked in the bin anytime you want. So in here, as far as fiscal responsibility is concerned, we're seeing continuing fiscal irresponsibility. If you don't trust experts who have the technical capability to judge the validity and the effectiveness of your proposals, if you don't trust them to actually come back and have a constructive discussion with you, even a constructive criticism, but a discussion. If you won't do that, then what you have is governments which are just isolated from the rest of their parliament. They're not answerable to anybody. And so I feel sorry for the OBR, because I'm sure they're trying their very best to do good work, but they've already had a slap in the face by trying to help a government do well, and they shouldn't necessarily assume that any word they say is going to be listened to again. I could see them being wound up within the year.
And of course, if the OBR were established in order to look at unforeseen consequences, one of the bleeding obvious consequences of the cost of living crisis is the impact it's had on mental health. And that shocking impact that soaring bills are having on mental health in the United Kingdom has been laid out in a report today that highlights how money worries are driving many people to thoughts of suicide. The Money and Mental Health Policy Institute, which is a charity founded and chaired by the consumer champion Martin Lewis, reported that 17% of respondents to a survey said they had experienced suicidal ideation over the past 9 months owing to the rising cost of living. About 3 in 10 of the 2,049 adults selected by YouGov said they had fallen behind with at least one bill. The polling found harassment by debt collectors was playing a big role in the mental health of those in arrears. At least 11% of those questioned said they now dread opening the post from banks, energy companies and other creditors. The report's authors have called on the UK government to urgently adopt US-style rules to stop debt collectors bombarding people about overdue bills. They also call for the National Suicide Prevention Strategies update to be published urgently to better reflect the role of financial difficulty as a contributing factor. The impact of the UK's low cost of living crisis is keeping rates of depression at much higher levels than before the COVID pandemic, according to official estimates showing adults in the most deprived areas are amongst those suffering most. The Office for National Statistics said about 1 in 6 adults experienced moderate to severe depressive symptoms last month. Although similar to the rates found in summer last year, it said the figure was 6 percentage points higher than before the COVID pandemic took hold in March 2020. Linking the elevated levels of depression with the cost of living crisis, the survey evidence showed people struggling with energy bills, rent, or a mortgage, or being forced to borrow to make ends meet, were more likely to have suffered this autumn. Greg, once you go behind in one, it's very difficult to stop going behind in another. And we end up, we've lost Greg for the moment. We shall come back whilst I move on to today's report over the Trident submarine safety warnings. The UK's Trident nuclear-armed submarines have recently been deployed at sea for extended periods of up to 5 months each, raising concerns that the longer patrols could affect operational safety, according to a former Navy commander. Investigative journalism site The Ferret is reporting that 2 Vanguard-class Trident submarines had been on patrols of 157 days this year, based on monitoring data from campaign group Nuke Watch. Rob Forsyth, who helped command Polaris nuclear submarines in the 1970s, is quoted as saying that with patrols now lasting 150 days or more, the most significant challenge was crew discipline. A male sailor received a 9-month sentence last year after he drunkenly tried to force a female colleague to give him oral sex on a nuclear submarine. A military court heard the sailor had been drinking 5 hours before the harassment started. This year, Admiral Ben Key, the head of the Royal Navy, ordered an investigation into abhorrent allegations of sexual assault and harassment of women working on submarines after whistleblowers reported abuse and bullying. In 2017, sailors on a Trident submarine were dismissed after they tested positive for using cocaine. And Forsyth wrote that drug use and inappropriate sexual behaviour reported in the media almost certainly are a consequence of the psychological challenges of long deployments. The Royal Navy operates a continuous at-sea deterrent policy, and one of 4 nuclear-armed submarines is always out on patrol, ready to attack in response to the United Kingdom facing a nuclear attack. Undersea patrols used to be 3 months long, but have been extended because HMS Vanguard, one of the 4 Trident submarines, was out of commission for 7 years after the discovery of a leak in a related test reactor. HMS Vanguard's absence from service until July 2022 reduced the number of available submarines to a bare minimum of 3, 1 in patrol, 1 preparing to go out, and a 3rd whose crew were in recovery after coming back. In November, another Trident submarine, HMS Victorious, was forced back to return to Fastlane after an electrical fire broke out on board. Victorious is now back at sea, although not currently on nuclear patrol. Greg, if I can take the last two in two different ways. If I take the mental health one, that talking about suicidal ideation, and once you begin to find things tough and difficult with one bill going in the red, it's not long before a 2nd and a 3rd, and that just piles up the pressure on top of you, so that the cost of living crisis has more than just the fact that we're not being able to afford things. It's the fact, that cumulative effect, that really gets people down, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And by the way, these 2 items are closely linked. We're talking about mental health in both of them. There's a clear thread through them. I had a period, 10 years as a local government councillor up until 5 years ago. And I regularly had people coming along to my surgeries who were really getting into despair and real problems and seeking some kind of help or advice. My job wasn't there to solve the financial problems, but I knew who to put them in touch with, how to signpost them to people that could advise them on pretty well almost any of their problems, most of them for sure. And many of them got through tough times where they were having severe mental health problems coming out of it. Some of my happiest times are actually when I learned that the signpost and the people that they then spoke to did actually find ways of finding long-term solutions, and those people, they went on to live much more fruitful, happy lives out of it. But anyway, it was slightly different though. We're talking about COVID now, we're talking about cost of living crisis. With COVID, people were hopeful that they wouldn't catch it. And if they did catch it, they were hopeful that they would get better reasonably soon and get back to normality. There was a kind of hump to go over with the threat of COVID. If you got it, hopefully recover. And it could get very bad. Here, it's different. It's not a hump to go over. This is a mountain to keep on climbing. It's a ratcheting up of the planes. There isn't an obvious, clear solution. You don't get over mountain debt easily. You don't get over your bills trebling, quadrupling easily. When you find that your food prices are added to that, you don't get over that easily, like a disease where you can possibly get some kind of cure or amelioration for it. So it's understandable that people feel these strains from it. And again, I'm no longer a counsellor, but I'm still in touch with many. Married to one, these are problems that they're having to deal with on a very regular basis, and people are even more stressed about it. And I wish I had an answer to it, but I'll kind of tie the 2 things together a bit. First of all, really what we want to do is figure out how are we getting into these hellish places where people are feeling this kind of mental stress. Are there other countries which can live in a way where they feel that stress a bit less and it's not having its toll on them mental health? Can we learn internationally? We actually, in many respects, are too focused on material things and on GDP and all your fiscal matters, and actually well-being is really much more important. Fortunately, in Scotland and the Scottish Government, we do put a fair bit of effort onto trying to lift people up a bit who are sinking. Now, it costs money that we don't have because it comes out of a budget which shrinks, but nonetheless, we put some kind of effort in there and think about the welfare and the well-being of people just that bit more. I have no general solutions other than there are other countries around the world which are coping with this much better. Those who are crushed by the cost of their fuel bills maybe should look to France. France is not a radical socialist country. Far from it. Look to France, where they nationalised the energy industry and they capped the cost of fuel at 4% increase, not 400%, 4%. There are other countries which are taking similar types of measures to make sure that people aren't overstretched. And I'm afraid the profit motive of big companies is what drives policy. And the friends of those companies drive the policy. So that the well-being of people, including their mental well-being, I mean, can't put a monetary value on it. So can you measure it? Does it count? That's the attitude.
And I suppose that putting the two together, the whole issue with regards to Trident, and if there was an example of a very pressured environment where people are thrown together, thrust together, and have to find a way of behaving within that very confined space and also that pressure that's there, because ultimately at the end of the day, it isn't an admiral who's going to see, it isn't the Secretary of State for Defence who's going to see. For many of these are people who have signed up to the Navy. They're ordinary working class kids who are looking for a career, and we are asking them to go through this crucible of mental health problem in order to defend their country in a deterrent that actually morally does not really have much of a basis in the 21st century.
Yeah, as far as the problem in the submarines concerned, you can just imagine the meeting between the system designers and the military planners. Okay, we've got the most dangerous weapons in the world. How can we ensure that there's no danger of them misused, misfired, or whatever, that nothing crazy occurs? How can we ensure that? Why don't we get dozens of people, cooping them up in a floating tin can for half a year, and that'll be fine. That'll keep them nice and sane. It's an impossible environment to maintain for any length of time, and to my mind, pretty well all the people I know, you remove the tin cans and the missiles from them, and you get them out of Scotland and preferably out of the world, and that way the stress of being with weapons of mass destruction. I said that is an overused, easily and glibly used term, weapons of mass destruction. What it means is that unlike a gun where you might kill a dozen people in the States going on a rampage, you don't go on a rampage, you fire one missile and it's millions. It's and to get your head around the concept of a weapon of mass destruction, that itself can drive you a bit crazy, just imagining the effects of it. So we shouldn't have anybody near them because they shouldn't exist in the first place, and that actually solves the problem of people being cooped up in those submarines and the kind of weird behaviour that comes as a consequence of that weird environment.
Absolutely. We go from how do you stop misfiring missiles from misfiring to misfiring fundraising, as it was announced today that the Tory party donations have slumped as a Tory donor has backed the Labour Party. Slumping by 40% in 3 months, the Conservatives, according to figures from the Electoral Commission, showing the party being overtaken by Labour for the first time in over a year. The Conservatives collected just under £3 million from July to September, a period that included the end of Boris Johnson's premiership and the subsequent leadership election. That compared with £5.4 million the previous quarter, and is the lowest figure since mid-2020. The donations to Labour jumped by nearly a quarter to £4.7 million, boosted by spending from unions and individual donors. The Tory party, of course, has endured a turbulent year, buffeted by the Partygate controversy that helped bring down Johnson, and then Liz Truss's mini-budget, which sent interest rates soaring and eventually ended her short-lived premiership. Labour's figures were boosted by £1.6 million in donations from unions and £1.5 million in individual donations. Amongst the donors was Gareth Quarry, a former Conservative donor who announced in October he had defected to Labour, accusing the Tories of being riven with arrogance and complacency. Greg, will Douglas Ross have to go and take a few more shifts running the line at Scottish football matches that he'll eventually forget that he ever did when it comes to putting in his expenses? Or is this actually a shift in how people see the Conservative Party in its totality?
No, Douglas Ross should up his game, become a quality footballer, get on the pitch, earn millions, and then he can fund his own party. But maybe that's not going to happen. I was interested when I saw the announcement about this, and I thought, right, it's easy for everybody to attack what's happening, and people who hate the Tories will jump in and say bad things about the Tories because that's happened to them and the funding is halved. And people who love the Labour Party will jump in there and say wonderful things about them and so on. But I thought I would get the take on it from Tory supporters. So in the Daily Mail website, I had a wee look in there, and they did not pull their punches at all on it. They really are taking the Tory party down in this one. Interesting though, isn't it? Tory support, their funding is halved, but Labour support, the funding for that is only got up by 20-odd%. You would have thought maybe they would have swapped around. So it's what you see quite a lot, that there are, I think it's not so much people switching from Tory to Labour as it's actually people backing off temporarily from Tory. We've seen that in by-elections. I was involved in one recently, helping out, and the Tory vote was down, but it didn't all en masse, and commonly you don't see this, it didn't all en masse switch to the Labour Party. It's just many Tories stay at home because they're fed up with their party. What does that mean? If the Tories get their act together in any coherent, semi-sensible way, then these absent voters will come back to them. These absent funders will come back to them. What I would actually like to see is more of a control over the spending limits on campaigns. I think that would help. If you cross the water, go to the States, there's what's effectively a by-election taking place in the state of Georgia today for the senator, a second round to get them elected. The Democrats will be spending, I believe, something of the order of $1 billion, many hundreds of millions of dollars anyway in that, and that's crazy money. When we had a referendum, was a regulation of sorts of what could be spent by each side in the campaign. And maybe that's what we need, because the silly money that political parties feel they now require to fight elections leaves them wide open to corruption, where they're bought by their pals, whether they're Russian oligarchs. And by the way, I'm a trade unionist, so I'm not going to talk about the usual attack that Tories make on Labour. But nonetheless, it leaves people open to taking large sums of money from people who therefore want influence as a consequence. And that undermines democracy. So the issue in here is not really so much that some money has gone up and some money has gone down. It's the number of zeros after the digits at the front is the problem in here. And there ought to be a greater constraint and regulation, I would say, of spending limits on campaigns by political parties.
And today it was announced that Al Jazeera has submitted new evidence to International Criminal Court over Shireen Abu Akleh and his killing. The Al Jazeera television network has filed a formal request to the International Criminal Court against Israeli forces over the killing of the veteran Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. They were shot in the head during an Israeli raid in a refugee camp on the outskirts of the occupied West Bank city of Jenin in May, while wearing a helmet and flak jacket that clearly indicated that she was a member of the press. Several investigations by human rights organisations, as well as international news outlets and the United Nations, have concluded that Shireen Abu Akleh, 51, was shot by an Israeli soldier. Her colleague, Ali al-Samoudi survived after being shot in the shoulder. Some of the investigations alleged that the reporter was deliberately targeted by the Israeli Defense Forces and that no Palestinian militants representing targets were present at the scene. After changing its stance several times, Israel now says there is a high possibility that Akli was killed by an IDF, Israeli Defense Force soldier, during an exchange of fire, but the shooting was accidental and therefore does not warrant a criminal investigation. Today's submission of new video evidence to The Hague, some of which was also aired in a new Al Jazeera documentary, provides a detailed account of events during the morning that she died. The formal filing shows Shireen and her colleagues were directly fired at by the IDF. Al Jazeera said in a statement, and confirms without any doubt that there was no firing in the area where Shireen was, other than the IDF shooting directly at her. Al Jazeera's request builds on September's formal complaint to the ICC submitted by Shireen Abu Akleh's family. In April, a coalition made up of the International Federation of Journalists, the Palestinian Press Syndicate, and leading human rights lawyers submitted an initial appeal to the ICC over the alleged systematic targeting of Palestinian journalists. Shireen Abu Akleh was killed a few days later, and Al Jazeera filed its own case asking the court to address her death in late May. I suppose, Greg, it's always been dangerous being somebody who was attempting to bring truth out from war zones and for places where there is likely to be conflict. But it seems, particularly within the Middle East, particularly dealing in certain parts of the world, it has got increasingly dangerous.
There's a seriously wrong unwillingness to be critical of what's going on in Israel and Palestine. Now, and people who even begin to hint at any criticism, there's commonly, not always, but commonly an attempt to take them down by hurling the abusive term anti-Semitic towards them. I'm not going to say that I'm anti-Semitic because I would like people to just take it for granted that any normal, reasonably decent person would be. So let's not even have that debate. But the question here is it now happening that the genuine attack by many of us to deal with anti-Semitism is actually being damaged because of the misuse of the term anti-Semitic for political purposes. So that takes me on to what is happening in Israel. We have the Israeli Defense Force, which has, in many occasions, and this is Shireen's case is a very good example of it, has acted as a rogue organisation. Has that ever happened internationally? I remember as a boy reading about what the horrors of what happened in Vietnam in the village of My Lai, and that was rogue troops. It's happened a bit closer to home in the Rock of Gibraltar when there was basically apparently an execution by the British Army of people that they didn't like. It happens internationally in several occasions. Is it impossible for that to happen in Israel? Because I do not see the calls for international tribunals. I don't hear the condemnation unanimously across the world saying these are rogue troops beyond the control of the government and acting in an utterly unacceptable way. So I think people should maybe raise their voices in condemnation a bit more than they have done. And when somebody says, but you're being anti-Semitic, just tell them, wheesht. There's something else in here that's at play, and don't try and bring down a legitimate discussion for the sake of achieving your own different agenda.
And of course, it's difficult given that with when earlier on was talking about Viktor Orban being the person who was going to try and stop funding going to the Ukrainians and so on, but also in Israel, there's a microcosm of that because the new defence minister is from a far-right religious party who is going to get Bibi, Benjamin Netanyahu, back into power. And one of the first things that Netanyahu is attempting to do is to change the law so that he doesn't end up being done for corruption. So there is a huge amount of concern there that's got nothing to do with the religion that is being professed, but a lot to do with human rights.
Utterly, there's probably very little I can add to it, but when it gets to the state where people are changing the law because they're about to be done under the law, well, we've seen it in several places and maybe quite close to home as well. So it's it's horrible this happens. The one thing that I think we always should be grateful for, that we have brave journalists willing to take the risks. We've had them. And in the UK, we've had the likes of Kate Adie dodging the bullets while reporting from the Balkans. And we've got to be proud of these people because they will bring to us the story, hopefully bring the truth, and so we can see what's happening rather than just get the propaganda being output by the others.
And staying in the place of the media, Rupert Murdoch today is facing deposition in a Dominion voting machine defamation lawsuit as he faces the law too. In the United States, a defamation lawsuit claiming Fox News purposefully promoted false claims that a voting tech company rigged the 2020 election is set to reach the apex of the media empire next week when the channel's owner, Rupert Murdoch, is scheduled to sit for a deposition. Lawyers for Dominion Voting Systems, which is suing Fox for $1.6 billion, are seeking to learn what knowledge Mr. Murdoch might have of his company's repeated broadcasts of the untruthful allegations. Segments of shows hosted by the prominent right-wing Fox personalities, Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham, are, among others, all featured a post-election narrative that Dominion's voting machines were somehow crooked, including switching ballots from Donald Trump to Joe Biden and the former's defeat to the latter in the race for the Oval Office, Dominion says. The lawsuit alleges the unsubstantiated claims were amplified by conspiracy theorist guests such as Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell, both lawyers for Trump who have either been sanctioned or are facing disciplinary measures for pushing in court the ex-president's big lie of a stolen election. Murdoch, who will sit for deposition via video link on the 13th and 14th of December, is the most significant name yet to have received a subpoena. On Monday, his son, Lachlan Murdoch, the chief executive of the channel's parent company, Fox Corp, gave testimony, whilst others called in last month included the Fox News CEO, Suzanne Scott, and President Jay Wallace. The Washington Post reported that Hannity gave a 7-hour deposition in August in which he is reported to have been asked specifically about a November 2020 episode of his show in which Powell claimed Dominion ran an algorithm that shaved off votes from Trump and awarded them to Biden and added additional huge quantities of fake Biden votes. The lawsuit, which was filed in June 2021 against Fox News, was expanded to include Fox Corp in June. It claims Fox sold a false story of election fraud in order to serve its own commercial purposes, severely injuring Dominion in the process. Fox Corp attempted to have the suit dismissed, but a Delaware judge said Dominion, which provided voting machines to 28 states in the 2020 election, had shown adequate evidence for it to proceed. There is certainly, Greg, a hangover from the 2020 election and Donald Trump still continuing his fantasy of you stole it from me, it's mine, please give me it back, as he's about to run again for 2024. This, from this side of the pond, just seems bizarre, strange.
Increasingly less bizarre, though, unfortunately, because it's not just something that's specific to the USA. There's, if I could go off at a tangent just for a second, Donald, forgive me, I'll not take too long. 23rd of November, Supreme Court announced that the Scottish Parliament didn't have the right to legislate for a referendum. Okay, I saw on social media some people murmuring, saying, those judges got it wrong, or that's atrocious, that decision. I'm pleased to say that I didn't see any massive headlines in social media or anywhere else saying those judges were the enemies of the people, which I was kind of fearful I might, and I didn't see it. So I'm proud of the pro-independence side for that. It was criticism. I had no criticism, particularly of the judges. It wasn't the judges' ruling that was flawed. the judges had to look at a piece of legislation and say if everything was compatible, and the legislation was flawed. The legislation was written by Westminster to give power only to Westminster to stop Scotland from having the power to decide its own future. The judges just reread the law, which I did as well, by the way. Many people did. So, what am I getting at? Enemies of the people. That's a term which was used by Brexiteers for judges who were seen by them as holding up the process. It's a term that's been used through the ages because enemy of the people was used by Goebbels to take down the democratic judges in Germany so as they could pave the way for a Nazi takeover. And demonising the institutions which are largely there to try and protect or to serve the interests or represent the views of the people, demonising them is a standard far-right, not just fascist, but general far-right technique. It's happened in the States where perfectly fair democratic processes have been gone through and decisions have been made, and Trump has done that. But we're seeing inklings of it in here as well. Watch your television tomorrow. I guarantee that the Democrat who I think will win this by-election that's taking place in Georgia, there was a lot of early voting took place. Democrats spent all these hundreds of millions of pounds trying to advertise and get people out to vote early because they were allowed to do that legally. And there will be complaints if the Democrat wins tomorrow that was rigged voting, and they somehow managed to get all these people voting by some other underhand method and stole the vote. Stealing the vote, stealing the election. Trump's done it. Other people are doing it increasingly around the world. And maybe if we stop knee-jerk automatically criticising the institutions which are designed to try and defend the law and the rule of law, if we stop undermining them, then that might actually help to maintain our protection from them. So what's happening in the States? It's coming this way. It's already here, and we're going to hear more and more of it, and we have to be prepared to take on these people who try to say that a vote that they didn't like is flawed, but the one that they did like, well, that's okay, because it's out there and it's circulating furiously just now.
Well, news that many will like is today that the Scottish Government funding for the agri-tourism sector has been announced. In a programme to drive the economic growth of the agri-tourism sector in Scotland, they are set to receive more than £442,000. The programme will see the recruitment of 4 farms across Scotland with the involvement of a wider circle of 8 rural businesses around each particular farm. At least 400 further individual rural businesses will also participate via meetings and seminars. The diverse sector includes retail sales of food and drink, accommodation, event spaces, and on-farm experiences. A recent study by tourism body Visit Scotland found the retail value of agri-tourism has increased by almost £50 million in the past year, rising from £62 million to over £110 million. The industry is also promoting the role of women in agriculture, with slightly more women than men who are directors of agri-tourism and farm retail businesses, according to the Visit Scotland report. Announcing the funding at the Scottish Agri-Tourism Conference in Perth, Rural Affairs Secretary Mary Gowden said, "This is an exciting and diverse business area that is enjoying significant growth. It has become an important contributor to our rural economies, offering the diversification opportunities, providing jobs and supporting family farms across Scotland. In addition, it allows consumers to engage directly with producers and learn firsthand how their food is made. A key part of agri-tourism is producing the high-quality food and drink Scotland is famous for, but it also delivers fantastic on-farm experiences and exceptional accommodation offerings that provide attractive alternatives for visitors too." Greg, it's no all oil, is it, this economy that Scotland has?
Well, not only are we a net exporter of oil and energy in general, but we're massively net exporters of agricultural products, food. And we can feed, we can heat, we can clothe ourselves, we can educate ourselves. But maybe we're not fit to be independent. Well, we'll see. So some of my favourite holidays are wee short breaks, 1 night, 2 nights away in the Scottish Highlands and the Borders. I've been up in Dornoch and down in Portpatrick in the last year, and it's lovely in some of these places looking at the menu. Your breakfast is brought to you by the hen's eggs are from such and such a farm. We've imported the black pudding all the way from Stornoway, but it's a Scottish fare for a full Scottish breakfast. Where do you ever hear that term? The pork sausages, well, we know where they've come from. It's, I think, for tourists coming to Scotland, actually having good quality Scottish food, and by the way, our reputation and our well-being as a country rests a good part on that reputation and ability to export our foods, damaged by Brexit, of course. It's lovely to integrate hospitality with food, with the beauty of Scotland, and with people getting the chance as tourists to go and visit places which they wouldn't have visited before. I like this initiative. I'd not seen much of it before. I expect to see a lot more. £400,000 is a useful sum of money. Put another zero on the end of that and it'll be even more useful if we can afford it.
Indeed, and that's all we've got time for this evening. Greg, can I thank you very much for joining us tonight and being such a fantastic contributor. It's been a good discussion here, both here and in the studio. And that is it for this evening. But before I go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. So, from me here in the studio, on a night where we discuss the Daily Mail, Al Jazeera and Rupert Murdoch and never fell out once, it's good night and thank you for watching.